Hello, this presentation is on teaching strategies to support the affective needs of gifted and talented students. During our time together, we're going to be looking at their particular affective needs, specific strategies for supporting these students, and then giving you a few additional resources as you plan for supporting students' affective, social, emotional needs. As we go through these needs today, think about how they are connected to the standards that you are using when working with these students. The NAGC, or National Association for Gifted Children standards, include learning and development. So part of our role is to promote ongoing self-understanding and awareness of their needs, and that includes both cognitive and affective areas. For assessment, we need to make sure that those assessments are appropriate for identification, but then also looking at their exact progress within school and outcomes and evaluating their learning. Curriculum and instruction. So how do we adapt and create culturally relevant curriculum using a variety of evidence-based strategies? And learning environments. Fostering personal and social responsibility, multicultural competence, interpersonal and technical communication skills for leadership in the 21st century. And last, programming. So understanding evidence that regards their cognitive, creative, and affective development, and programming that meets their concomitant needs. We would use that expertise to develop, implement, and manage their services. One of the major sources of discussion, and I think aha moments that teachers and many students have related to gifted and talented, has to do with overexcitabilities. So Dabrowski looked at 5 major areas where it was common for students and adults identified as gifted for having unique patterns. One is psychomotor. Sometimes this can look like an excess of, well, what looks like physical energy. This could include times when we see students being over-identified for things like ADHD. Sometimes our male students, even more so, may be noticed as having an abundance of energy. Sensual, so that could be with the 5 senses: hearing, seeing, touching, tasting, smelling, more sensitivity. It could even go into allergies, but thinking of students that are sensitive to particular types of material or clothing, particular lights or sounds, maybe being more sensitive to those things. Intellectual is what we think of often, and that's someone that's so passionate about learning. It might not be what you're doing in class, but what they are interested in, they're just full-on interested, and a strong curiosity in general related to learning. Imaginational. So that would be, again, that could be connected to creativity, but it could also be imagination for some scary things or fears and so on. And then emotional. So big emotions, a lot of times, that concept of balance, when we think about overexcitabilities, balance is not a word that we would put here often. So the emotions might look bigger. So sad can look very sad. Angry could look, watch out, angry, and happy could just light up a room. Now, not everyone, of course, has these. Most people that are identified as gifted may not identify with each area, but it's very common for individuals to identify with some of these traits when they are identified as gifted. And, when we think about this, these present some unique challenges for students as well. And a lot of times, schools, I can find, struggle even more so with supporting kids in these areas. So maybe they've taken care of their intellectual needs at times, but then some of the other needs that they have connected to giftedness become more of a stumbling block. James T. Webb talked about a lot of different things. He was also the founder of SENG, the Social Emotional Needs of the Gifted, but he talks about more gifted individuals having kind of a unique area of depression from some other populations, in that they were more likely to have existential depression. Again, that kind of what's the purpose? What's the meaning of this? Why, I have this strong sense of justice and fairness, and yet I look at the world and it's not really fitting that. And what's the purpose? What's my reason for life? This can happen quite young. This can happen older. It could be event triggered, but it could also just be a part of the thought process there. Perfectionism is certainly a common trait for many gifted individuals as well. So the idea that, anything less than perfect is no good. And this can be pretty devastating, of course. A lot of additional anxiety. There can be some underachievement tied to this. And it's really a cognitive distortion. So that idea that it needs to be perfect is bound to cause issues because, of course, we're not perfect. And some of that develops because of having many years of things being too easy. So by giving appropriate challenges, that can support that. And just celebrating the process versus the product. I talk about striving for improvement is good, striving for our best is good, but perfectionism can really become a big stumbling block. Leadership. So those strong personalities, a lot of times we can see some real big leaders within gifted and talented populations as well due to some of those traits. They might be at times perceived as bossy or domineering when they're very enthusiastic or when they're wanting to run and take charge. They can be so intensely involved that they also may not notice other people's lack of interest or motivation. We're going to move into the part that I think we'll want to focus more time on, which is what are some particular strategies. There's no magic answer or silver bullet, but there are lots of strategies that we can use to gain some additional support for the affective needs of these children. Luckily today we have much more focus on mindfulness strategies. So it's not just under the purview of counselors or psychologists or social workers anymore, but what are some things we can do to play some soft meditative music, to integrate some yoga or some body movement exercises, to do some journaling, things like that within the classroom. Some additional core class ideas, I mentioned it on the previous slide as well, but journaling in general. Just having a simple notebook where students can take some time and write and draw and share out their feelings. I had some protocols working with students where they could keep that private, and I would keep it private for them, and they didn't have to share it if they didn't want to. I did talk about the only time that there might be that there would be a caveat to that would be if there was a concern that I had where they were possibly, a danger or in trouble for themselves or for others, and then I would look at it. But otherwise, if they wanted to write, or maybe they write and then tear it up, but giving them that process to be creative as well and not worry about spelling and just to get their thoughts on paper. That connects to just free art expression as well, versus crafts where they can really just build. That could be with Legos or with art projects in general. Having a calming space or a calming place within your classroom or meditative music playing is always nice. Figuring out where students may want to be in the room. They could be at a standing desk, sitting on cushions, or things of that nature. And then bibliotherapy, it's really kind of studying children that might have similar struggles and issues, and stories of triumph over adversity. Setting up mentorships, that could be with older children, that could be with teachers, that could be with parents or community members. Doing things and really celebrating fun with failure. What can we do that's fun that we might not be good at? I run all the time, even though I typically come in last place, and I try to highlight that and talk about how it's fun still. Having a genius hour where they can really dive into, or I've heard of Fun Fridays as well, where it's just time for them to be diving into things they're passionate about. That could be related to their advanced learning plan goals as well. Opportunities to connect are huge. So having a lunch bunch or a lunch buddy, just a way that you can connect one-on-one or in very small groups, listening to music, playing around, talking, it is huge. And those needs for bonding and caring, everyone has it, but some of the sensitivities can make it even more powerful. And then doing one-on-one short check-ins related to their affective goals. That could be leadership, creativity, anxiety, or stress management techniques, even if it's just a 1 to 2 minute check-in every week or two, but where you're monitoring together and having that ongoing relationship. Grounding is something that more and more teachers and counselors have used, where it's focused on our 5 senses. So if a student's really struggling to calm down, they can stop, and it's best if they actually say this out loud with you, but 5 things that they see, and just actually have them say it. So I see my desk, I see my computer, I see my phone, I see my soda, and I see my paper. 4 things I can touch, and have them actually touch it. So I'm touching my pants, I'm touching my watch, I'm touching my keyboard, and I'm touching this paper. 3 things I can hear. I hear some people talking in the background, I hear my own voice, and I hear kind of the hum of the computer. 2 things I can smell, so having them take a little bit of time and really just checking out their environment in that sense. So it smells like a nice, clean environment. I smell my perfume as well. And then 1 thing I can taste, what's happening with my mouth. I've recently had some soda, so I'm feeling nicely quenched. My thirst is quenched. So what's the purpose there? It's really re-engaging. If a student moves into kind of a fight or flight response and they're operating out of their lower brain or their lizard brain, where they're not thinking very rationally and they might be in a state of great anxiety, it's re-engaging, getting them back in touch with their body. It's also re-engaging what we would call their wizard brain, right, or their higher cognitive functions. Many gifted students struggle with prioritizing. They're passionate about so many things. I find First Things First from Stephen Covey to be helpful. So I would have a student write down all of the things that they're doing maybe each week or each day and help them categorize. And a lot of times they might need our support with this. What is urgent versus not urgent? What's important and what's not so important? And we're really hoping to take some of these not important things off the list and even prioritizing within the important ones. Some schools and districts use, and this was originally tied to suicide prevention, but it's called Sources of Strength. And I just like the general model of talking with students about what are the areas where they have supports and where can I help them continue to build up their supports, because we all have hard times. And so if I'm struggling for any number of reasons, where can I get some additional supports? We talk about family support. Those are healthy relationships that could be maybe not parents, but maybe chosen family or aunts or grandparents and so on. Positive friends, people that make us feel better. Mentors. So who are people that we look up to? What are healthy activities I can do? That might be sports, that might be writing, that might be whatever it is. Doing things for other people, being generous. Spirituality, that doesn't necessarily just mean church or God. That can certainly also mean nature or the sense of connection with others. Medical access, so they may or may not have insurance, but knowing where the nearest hospitals are, knowing where to go if they need help there. And then same with mental health. Who are the people they can talk to at school? What are the numbers and the hotlines outside of school that they can use if needed as well? I think it's very helpful for students to have a conversation about what are some things that I know about myself versus the way others perceive me, and maybe talking about some areas that are surprising to us. This actual model is called Johari's window. We don't necessarily have to go that deep with them, but let's have that conversation and look at there are differences for students that are gifted, of course, as well. It's not a flaw. It's not an imperfection. It's something that is unique to me and my circumstance. And the way I perceive myself versus the way others perceive me might be quite different. And so it can lead to a lot of aha moments and some good metacognition. Remember, all people have basic needs, and it's not just for survival, but it also has some freedom, some fun, giving some power, and then that connection, that love and belonging. So when we're struggling, or when we see a student struggling, figuring out what are their basic needs that aren't being met. Sometimes it can be fun or freedom with some choice. I think sometimes it can also come down to not feeling connected and that love and belonging. So this goes back to what are some of those kind of soft things we can do as teachers to support. Leadership strategies, helping students understand more about delegating, assisting, facilitating, how to cooperate more effectively. Sometimes, pairing very purposefully with students with different strategies and skills and teaching some of those leadership skills. In terms of creativity, giving them certainly some time just to be creative, to develop those habits of mind, looking at different perspectives. I'm on number 6 right now. This is from Joyce Van Tassel Basca, but being able to take different perspectives, coming up with new or novel ideas for solutions to problems. Number 1, how do they take a risk? How can we celebrate differences? The second one, talking about how do we develop divergent skills? So not so much on the convergent, what's the answer, because we get a lot of that in school, but how can we come up with something new, something creative, something no one else has? Exposing students to major areas of thought. Number 3, developing communication skills by requiring students to provide feedback and to communicate with others. And 5, developing motivation and passion by broad exposure to culture and follow-up of supporting expressions of strong interest linked to values and predispositions in and out of school contexts, moving through context there. A few other thoughts as you're working with students. Watch out for, I relate this certainly to the perfectionism piece, catastrophizing beliefs. So sometimes being that sounding board and talking about, this is anything less than perfect, really total failure, the end of the world. What's another way to look at this? And there's some cognitive behavioral strategies that you could research further for that as well. And having that strong relationship where you can talk through that with a student is very helpful. Looking at additional community outlets for connecting with others in non-competitive ways. A lot of times it's as simple as rest and nutrition. So gifted students may sometimes sleep less than other students, and may struggle even more with nutrition because of those intensities where they may kind of, get so into things that they forget about their nutritional needs. So it can be as simple as checking in on those things. Remembering to connect them with trained counselors and psychologists that also have a specialty in giftedness if their symptoms become severe, especially troublesome. And then connecting to support groups. Sometimes there are student support groups and parent support groups. And one resource is the Sang parent groups. A few websites that you might be interested in related to social and emotional. The big one would be sanggifted.org. There's also a warehouse of information that can be found related to these and many other topics for gifted students at davidsongifted.org, hoagiesgifted.org, and the Gifted Development Center at gifteddevelopment.com. Thank you for your time and attention, and I look forward to talking with you further on teaching strategies to support the affective needs of our gifted learners.